That evening, as the clinking of forks against plates filled the dimly lit dining room, the familiar comfort of our nightly routine was shattered in a way I never could have foreseen. After nearly 20 years of marriage, my wife, Maggie, sat across from me, her delicate fingers wrapped around the stem of a wine glass, her gaze flickering with something unspoken. The air between us thickened when she uttered those words that no husband ever wants to hear, "Honey, we need to talk." My stomach plummeted, a cold sweat prickling my skin as my heart thudded painfully against my ribcage. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles whitening, bracing myself for a blow I wasn't sure I could withstand. Was she about to confess an affair? Was she ready to walk away from everything we'd built together? My mind spiraled into chaos. A storm of questions swirling faster than I could process. Where had we gone wrong, and how had I missed the signs? I stared at her, my breath shallow, searching her face for clues. Her auburn hair caught the soft glow of the chandelier, and her hazel eyes, usually so warm, seemed clouded with something I couldn't quite decipher. My hands trembled as I forced words past the lump in my throat. "Should I talk?" I asked, my voice tight, straining to sound calm despite the panic clawing at my chest. She tilted her head slightly, taking a slow sip of wine, a gesture that might have seemed casual to anyone else, but I noticed the faint quiver in her fingers, the way her lips pressed together a little too tightly. "Talk about what?" she replied, her tone measured but edged with a nervousness that mirrored my own. I studied her every move, the way she barely touched her food, the subtle shift of her shoulders, desperate for any hint of what was coming. The suspense gnawed at me, a relentless ache I couldn't ignore. Before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "Raw and jagged, have you cheated on me, Maggie?" Her face twisted for a fleeting moment, her eyes widening in shock as if I'd struck her. "No, of course not," she shot back, her voice sharp with indignation, her cheeks flushing with a mix of hurt and defiance. The force of her denial sent a shiver racing down my spine, and though I clung to the relief her words offered, a sliver of doubt lingered. "If not an affair, then what? Are you planning to leave me?" I pressed, my voice cracking as dread coiled tighter around my heart. "God, George! Where do you get these ideas?" she exclaimed, leaning back in her chair, her expression a blend of exasperation and disbelief. "I would never leave you. I love you." Her reassurance washed over me like a balm, and I echoed her words, my own love for her spilling out as I vowed to stand by her side no matter what lay ahead. Her eyes softened, glistening with a warmth that reminded me of the woman I'd fallen for all those years ago, and a small, tentative smile curved her lips. But the tension hadn't fully dissipated. "Then what's wrong? Are you sick?" I asked, concern creeping into my tone as I leaned forward, searching her face for signs of distress. "I'm fine, honey," she insisted, her voice steady now. "I didn't mean to scare you. It's just, there's been a distance between us lately, hasn't there? With Meredith off at college, the house feels so empty. Maybe it's empty nest syndrome. Or maybe we're both just hitting some kind of midlife slump, but we're stuck, George. We're in a rut." Relief flooded through me, tinged with a lingering unease. A rut? That I could handle, or so I hoped. "How so?" I asked, hungry for more, needing to understand her perspective, to find a way through this together. She sighed, setting her glass down with a gentle clink, her fingers tracing the rim absent-mindedly. "We've settled into this predictable rhythm," she explained, her voice soft but resolute. "Work swallows up so much of our time, your job drags you across the country, mine keeps me buried in the office until all hours. By the time we're together, we're too exhausted to connect. When was the last time we were intimate, George?" Her question hung in the air, heavy and inescapable, and I felt my face heat as I racked my brain for an answer. Truthfully, I couldn't pinpoint it. Weeks, maybe months had slipped by in a haze of fatigue and routine. It's been a while, I admitted, a thread of frustration weaving into my words. But every time I've tried. You've brushed me off, too tired, too busy, too something. Maggie nodded, her expression softening with a flicker of guilt. I know, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been part of the problem. When you're in the mood, I'm drained, but back when we were younger, being tired didn't stop us. We'd make love 3-4 times a week. Laughing and tangled up in each other like nothing else mattered. Now? It's a rarity, a fleeting moment we barely manage to grasp. I felt a surge of irritation bubble up, cutting through her words. I agree, I said sharply, but it's not all on me. You've turned me away more times than I can count. Her eyes met mine, steady and unyielding. I want to fix this, George, she said. Her tone earnest. I want to bring back the fire we used to have, to bridge this gap before it's too late. We're stuck, and I don't want to just coast through life like this. We need to shake things up. I'm not bored, I protested, crossing my arms, feeling a spark of defensiveness flare within me. My life's exciting enough. She arched an eyebrow. A playful skepticism dancing in her gaze. Oh, really? What's on the agenda tonight, then? I hesitated, the wind knocked out of my argument as I mumbled, watching The Curse of Oak Island. They're supposed to uncover something big tonight. She smirked, leaning forward slightly. Isn't it always just dirt and rusty nails they find? I shrugged, conceding with a reluctant grin. More or less. Okay, maybe it's a little mundane, but it's our routine, Maggie. It's comfortable. She shook her head, her expression firming. I don't want comfort, she said. Her voice rising with conviction. Honestly, my desire for you has faded, just like yours has for me. We're in this strange phase where the spark's dimmed, and that scares me. We're barely past 40. With decades ahead, what happens if we've already lost this now? Her words hit me hard, stirring a mix of confusion and defiance. We'll stay together because we're married, I countered. Leaning back in my chair. That's what couples do. We've settled into each other, it's natural, Maggie. And who said I'm not interested in you? I am, always have been. She blinked. Caught off guard by my admission, and a faint smile tugged at her lips. We've become like roommates, George, she said softly. Pleasant ones, sure, with the occasional tumble in bed. But I want more than that. I love you, and I know you love me, but is it the same as it was when we first said, I do? I paused, letting her question sink in. The weight of it pressing against my chest. It's different now, I replied slowly, searching for the right words. Our love's like a bottle of aged wine, deeper, richer, more complex. We're not those reckless kids anymore, our drives aren't what they used to be. Don't you ever miss the quiet we've earned? She reached across the table, her hand finding mine. Her touch warm and grounding. I don't know, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I love our peace, but I miss the thrill, the wild chemistry we had. It's like that old hammock out back, swaying there for 20 years, patched up and weathered. You're ready to sink into it, but I'm wondering if we should replace it with something new. I chuckled at her analogy, but her next words sobered me. I'm not asking you to give anything up, she clarified, squeezing my hand. I'm saying let's reignite what's dormant, bring back the excitement, the hunger we couldn't quench. My desire's not gone, it's just sleeping. So you're saying our sex isn't good anymore? I asked. A pang of insecurity tightening my throat. No, no, she rushed to reassure me, her eyes wide with sincerity. You're an amazing lover, thoughtful, skilled. Always knowing just how to make me feel loved. It's not about quality, it's about wanting it in the first place. We've lost that urge. I frowned, grappling with her logic. What are you getting at? Maggie? She leaned closer, her voice firm with resolve. I want more. We've gone from lovers to partners, and I miss feeling alive with you, passion, romance, all of it. Sex is part of that. But it's bigger than just the act. I tilted my head, still wrestling with her words. But you've said before you didn't want it. Do you, or don't you? She paused. Her gaze dropping to our joined hands as she gathered her thoughts. I do, she confessed, her voice raw. Maybe I'm chasing a piece of youth again, but it's not just hormones or some midlife fling. Don't brush this off as a phase, I need you to see how real this is for me. Guilt flickered through me as I realized I'd misstepped. I'm sorry, I said, softening. I didn't mean to dismiss you. I just don't get why this is hitting now. Her expression eased, a sigh escaping her lips. It's not sudden, she explained, her eyes locking with mine. I've been wrestling with this for months. Maybe longer. I'm scared, George, if we don't act, if we let this drift keep growing, our marriage might not make it. Her vulnerability pierced me. A quiet desperation I hadn't seen before shimmering in her gaze. Why didn't you say something sooner? I asked, frustration edging my tone as I leaned forward. She met my stare, unflinching. Her eyes a mix of sorrow and determination. It took me time to figure this out myself, she admitted. But I couldn't let it fester anymore. I had to bring it up now, before it's too late. Her honesty struck a deep chord, and I felt the weight of her fears settle over me. All right, I said, nodding slowly, my voice steady with resolve. I'm listening, Maggie. You've clearly thought this through, and it matters to you. It matters to me too. As the candlelight flickered between us, I knew this was a turning point, one we'd face together. No matter what came next. The living room was bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun, its rays filtering through the sheer curtains and casting delicate patterns on the hardwood floor. I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, the weight of our faltering marriage pressing down on me like a storm cloud I couldn't outrun. What do you propose we do? I asked Maggie, my voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside. I took a deep breath, forcing the words out with a resolve I didn't entirely feel. I was thinking we could seek help, maybe a marriage counselor, or even an intimacy coach. Should I start looking for someone? My offer hung in the air, a lifeline I hoped she'd grab onto. I wanted her to see I was willing to fight for us, to nurture what we'd built over decades, even if it meant stepping out of my comfort zone. Maggie's face softened. A fragile smile breaking through the tension that had etched lines around her eyes. She swiped at a tear clinging to her cheek, the gesture small but loaded with emotion, relief, perhaps, or gratitude. That's a great idea, she said, her voice catching slightly. Thanks for suggesting it. I think we should give it a shot. Her words lifted my spirits momentarily. A flicker of hope igniting in my chest. But then her expression shifted, her brow furrowing as if a new thought had taken root, one she couldn't shake. I could almost see the gears turning behind her hazel eyes, the ones I'd stared into 1,000 times since we were kids. I've been thinking about other approaches too, she continued. Her tone cautious yet determined. But first, let me ask you something. Your company, it's a creative agency, right? I nodded, puzzled by the detour. Yeah, one of the top 2 in the state. Maybe even top 5 in the country. Pride swelled in my chest as I spoke, though I couldn't fathom what this had to do with us. Why does that matter? My curiosity was tinged with unease. A knot forming in my stomach as I tried to follow her train of thought. She leaned forward slightly, her hands resting on her knees, her posture intent. Do you always hire the best people? She pressed, her gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that made me squirm. Absolutely, I replied, confidence masking my growing confusion. But no one's been with us for 20 years, the company's only 6 years old. We're constantly bringing in fresh talent. High turnover's just part of the industry. Keeps us sharp, innovative. I shrugged, still unsure where she was steering this. She nodded, a knowing glint in her eyes. Exactly. You're always recruiting new skills, new energy, new ideas. Your work evolves, improves. Adapts. Her words were measured, deliberate, and that knot in my gut tightened. Yeah, I guess so, I said warily. What's your point, Maggie? She straightened, her expression turning solemn. Almost reverent. Next month marks 20 years since we got married, George. Before that, we were exclusive for 3. That's nearly 23 years with just each other, sexually, emotionally. Everything. You were my first. And from what you've told me, you only had 2 girlfriends before me. Her voice trembled slightly. Not with sadness but with a quiet intensity that sent a wave of dread crashing over me. I felt my pulse quicken, my palms growing clammy. And? I prompted. My nerves fraying as I braced for whatever came next. She tilted her head, her eyes searching mine. Would you hire someone at your agency who learned their skills 23 years ago and never bothered to update them? Never sought new techniques, new inspiration, new education? Would you want your team practicing something only once every few months, letting it stagnate? Could your company be the best if everyone didn't push to grow, to reach higher? Her questions hit me like a barrage, each one sharper than the last. I opened my mouth to respond, grasping for a defense. It's not the same, I argued, my voice tighter than I intended. Work and us, they're different. Are they, though? She countered, her tone gentle but unyielding. She leaned closer. Her hands gesturing as if trying to sculpt her thoughts into something I could hold. I'm talking about us, George. 23 years ago, we were experts at something else. We were incredible together, enjoying each other, having mind-blowing sex. It was constant, electric, full of discovery and excitement. Her eyes drifted upward, lost in the haze of memory. And I could see it too, those early days when every touch sparked like flint on steel, when we couldn't keep our hands off each other. But then Meredith came, she went on. Her voice softening with nostalgia and a hint of sorrow. Everything shifted. We became parents, damn good ones, chauffeuring her to soccer practice, coaching her basketball team. We honed those skills. Mastered that life. But our connection? We let it coast, let it settle into autopilot. What used to thrill us turned predictable, comfortable. The spark faded, replaced by routine. Her words sliced through me, each one a mirror reflecting truths I'd avoided. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What are you getting at, Maggie? I asked. A tremor of apprehension threading through my voice. She met my gaze, her resolve hardening. I'm saying I don't want comfort anymore, George. I'm tired of it. I crave something alive. Something exhilarating. I want to learn again, to grow, to become a better lover, not just for you, but for us. I want to reignite that fire, to shatter this mundane existence we've built. I want to fall in love again. I need a lover, not a roommate. I need passion, George. I need it. Her declaration hung between us, raw and electric. And I felt a chaotic mix of emotions surging through me, excitement at the thought of reclaiming what we'd lost, dread at what it might cost. Okay, I said, my voice hoarse but determined. Reached for her hand, desperate to anchor us in this storm. She took it, her touch warm and steadying, but her smile was tinged with sadness. George. I know you'd move mountains for me if you could, she said softly, shaking her head. But it's still us. The same dynamic. We'd try, and maybe it'd feel fresh for a while. But eventually we'd slip back into boredom. These ideas, they're a start, but they're too safe, too convenient. We're not really learning anything new, not pushing ourselves. I frowned. My mind racing to keep up. So what are you suggesting? Trepidation crept into my chest, a shadow I couldn't shake as I awaited her answer. I was following you, but now I'm lost. Grasping for something concrete, I ventured a guess. Maybe a resort for open couples? Her reaction was instant, visceral. She recoiled, her face twisting in disgust. God, no, she snapped. Her voice sharp with revulsion. I couldn't handle strangers hitting on us, all that pressure for casual hookups. That's not what I mean at all. Then what? I pressed. Frustration bubbling up as I struggled to pin down her vision. What do you have in mind? She paused, her fingers tightening around mine as if bracing herself, and me, for what came next. I think we need something unconventional, she said slowly, her words deliberate. A reset. Something bold and thrilling to breathe life back into our romance, to rekindle that spark in our sex life. Her eyes held mine, searching for understanding, and despite the uncertainty gnawing at me, her passion was infectious. That sounds intriguing, I admitted. A cautious excitement flickering within me. I'm in. How do we do it? She exhaled, her shoulders squaring as she delivered her bombshell. I think I should start dating other people. The words landed like a thunderclap, obliterating the fragile hope I'd been clinging to. My excitement evaporated, replaced by a cold rush of shock and disbelief. Wait, what? I yanked my hands from hers, staring at her as if she'd sprouted horns. Could you repeat that? I don't think I heard you right. She didn't flinch, her gaze steady. I said I need to start dating others, she repeated, calm and resolute. I leaned back in my chair, then forward again, my brows knitting together as I tried to process the absurdity of it. You're serious? Have you lost your mind? My voice rose, incredulity sharpening its edges. She blinked, clearly startled by my reaction, but her composure held. No, not at all, she insisted. Her tone earnest. I've thought about this, a lot. I truly believe it's what we need. I shook my head, disbelief morphing into something darker. Maggie, you've had wild ideas before, but this? This is insane. You don't see how crazy this sounds. I don't think it's crazy, George, she replied, her voice a quiet anchor amid my rising storm. If you let me explain, you'll understand. I crossed my arms, skepticism warring with a reluctant curiosity. Fine, I said tersely. Explain. Explain how you think dating other men, cheating on me, will fix our marriage and reignite our sex life. Her eyes flashed with frustration, but she kept her cool. I'm not suggesting I cheat on you. She clarified, her words precise. I'm proposing I date other men besides you. The distinction felt razor thin, and my mind reeled. Wait, like real, romantic dates? I asked. Incredulity giving way to outrage. Exactly, she affirmed, unflinching. Genuine dates, as if we weren't married. My anger flared, hot and jagged. So what, do you sleep with them on the first date? Or make them wait like you did with me? I demanded, my voice trembling with betrayal. She didn't rise to the bait. I didn't say anything about sex, she replied evenly. Her calm a stark contrast to my unraveling. So sex is off the table in this little dating scenario? I shot back, grasping for clarity amid the chaos. Well, no, she admitted. Her tone still measured. I'm not saying that either. My frustration boiled over. So you do want to sleep with someone else? I pressed, anger surging like a tide. I didn't say that. She countered, firm but gentle. I'm saying I'd be open to exploring where these dates might lead, romantically, emotionally, maybe physically. I don't know yet. I stared at her. My mind a battlefield of hurt and confusion. Relationships? I echoed, my voice rising. So not only do you want to date other men, but you also want to sleep with them and build relationships with them? Maggie, you're twisting everything we've built into something unrecognizable. She opened her mouth to respond. But I barreled on, too raw to stop. 23 years, and now you want to throw it away for some thrill? I don't even know who you are right now. Her face softened. A flicker of pain crossing her features, but she didn't back down. George, I'm not throwing anything away, she said quietly. I'm trying to save us, save me, from a life that's become a shadow of what it could be. Just hear me out. And despite every instinct screaming at me to walk away, I stayed. Tethered by the love that still lingered beneath my fury. The living room felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension as George slumped into the worn leather armchair. His fingers digging into the armrests. Maggie stood across from him, arms crossed, her chestnut hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. The soft glow of the floor lamp cast long shadows across the hardwood, flickering as if it too were uneasy with the storm brewing between them. George's voice sliced through the silence, edged with a raw disbelief that had been simmering all evening. Yes or no, Maggie, would you ever sleep with these other men? His words hung there, heavy, demanding an answer she didn't want to give. Her patience frayed like an old rope, snapping thread by thread. George, it's not that simple, she shot back, her tone sharp but wavering, as if she were teetering on the edge of exhaustion. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, the lines on his face deepening with every second she delayed. Yes or no, he pressed, his voice rising, insistent, a hammer striking an anvil. She hesitated. Her lips parting slightly, then closing again as she searched for a way out. Finally, reluctantly, the truth slipped free. Yes, probably, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze dropping to the floor as if she couldn't bear to see the fire it would ignite. George's anger erupted like a volcano, molten and uncontrollable. Then this is betrayal, he bellowed. His voice cracking with the weight of hurt and outrage. He shot to his feet, pacing the room, his footsteps thudding against the wood like war drums. You're telling me you'd go out, have some romantic little evening, and then sleep with him? That's cheating, Maggie, plain and goddamn simple. His hands clenched into fists, trembling with the effort to keep his fury from spilling over entirely. Inside, his mind raced, images of her laughing with someone else, touching someone else, shredded his composure. He'd loved her fiercely, built a life with her, and now this? Maggie took a step toward him, her hands outstretched as if she could physically pull the tension from the air. No, George. It's not betrayal, she countered, forcing calm into her voice despite the storm in his eyes. It wouldn't be cheating if you knew, if you agreed to it. I'd tell you everything, who I was with, what happened. We'd talk about it when I got home. You'd be part of it. Her words were steady, rehearsed, but her fingers twisted nervously at the hem of her sweater, betraying the unease she fought to hide. She believed this could work, that he could see her logic if he'd just stop shouting long enough to listen. He froze mid-step, turning to face her, his jaw slack with disbelief. You're not just talking about cheating, you want to rub it in my face? Humiliate me? His voice dripped with venom, thick with the sting of wounded pride. What the hell makes you think I'd ever say yes to something so insane? Have you lost your mind completely? Inside, his chest ached, a hollow pit opening where trust used to live. He pictured her coming home, her cheeks flushed from another man's touch, expecting him to nod and smile like some pathetic fool. It was unbearable. Maggie's eyes softened, pleading now. As she stepped closer. George, please, just breathe. Let's talk this out like adults. There's no need to yell or curse. I know it's a lot to take in, but you love me. You're rational, brilliant even. I still think, you'd come around, see the sense in this, maybe even support me. Her voice trembled slightly, a fragile thread of hope woven through it. She'd always admired his mind. His ability to cut through chaos with reason. Surely, he could do it now, couldn't he? Support you? George echoed, his tone drenched in sarcasm, his laugh bitter and hollow. While you're off screwing other men? That's rich, Maggie. He sank back into the chair, running a hand through his graying hair, trying to grapple with the absurdity of it all. His mind spun. Did she really think he'd sit there, cheering her on like some twisted coach? She knelt beside him, her hands resting lightly on his knee, her hazel eyes searching his face. It's not just about sleeping with someone else, George, she said earnestly, her voice softening with conviction. If that's all I wanted, I could have done it years ago, your brother, your buddies. Even that sleazy boss of yours. They've all tried, you know. But I never once strayed. I'd never betray you like that, not in secret. This is different, it's about us. Bringing something new. Something thrilling into our lives. It'd wake us up, make things electric again. You'd feel it too. He stared at her, incredulous, his brow furrowing as he tried to untangle her logic. So what? We're a team in this? Together? His voice wavered between confusion and scorn. You want me to tag along on your dates or something? She shook her head quickly, a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. No, not like that. You'd stay here, and I'd go out. When I got back, I'd tell you everything, every detail. And yes, I'd want us to be close after, to reconnect. It's love. George, a way to strengthen what we have. His stomach churned at the thought, a mix of revulsion and disbelief twisting inside him. You expect me to sleep with you after you've been with some other guy? He asked, his voice low and icy, each word deliberate. She flushed deeper, but her resolve didn't crack. Yes, I'd hope so. It'd be us reclaiming each other. But if you can't, we could skip that part, she offered, desperation creeping into her tone. I just don't want this to break us. It's still cheating. He shot back, his voice firm, unyielding. You can dress it up however you want, but it's infidelity. She leaned in, her hands tightening on his knee. It's not love, George. I love you, not him. Whoever he'd be. It'd just be physical, just sex. No emotions, no strings. He tilted his head, studying her, his silence heavy. Just sex, he repeated slowly, testing the weight of it. So you're saying there'd be no feelings involved? No connection with this guy? None, she confirmed, her voice resolute. Purely physical. An exploration, nothing more. He leaned back. Crossing his arms, his mind churning through her words. Let me get this straight, he began, his tone cautious, measured. You want to go out and have sex with another man. That's it? Just for the hell of it? She nodded, tentative hope flickering in her eyes. Yes, exactly. Why? The question burst out of him, raw and unguarded, his confusion spilling over. Why do you need to go somewhere else for that? What's missing? She faltered, her confidence wavering as she searched for an answer. I guess, for a change, she said weakly. Her hands dropping to her lap. His hurt flared, sharp and piercing. So I'm not enough for you? I don't satisfy you anymore, and you're hunting for something better? His voice cracked. The vulnerability he hated showing laid bare. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. No, George, that's not it, I swear. But her protest rang hollow, and he pressed on, relentless. Think about it, Maggie. If you love sushi, and you found the best spot in town, why waste time on some mediocre joint? Why risk it when you've got perfection right here? She bit her lip. Considering. Maybe for a different flavor, she ventured, but he cut her off. And risk disappointment? If you're happy with what you've got, why look elsewhere? It doesn't add up. She slumped slightly, defeated. I don't know, okay? I don't fully understand it myself. Her voice was small, tinged with frustration. If it's just sex, why not with me? He asked. A spark of mischief lighting his eyes despite the ache in his chest. We barely do it anymore, she admitted, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. So let's fix that, he said. A grin tugging at his lips. If it's sex you're after, I've got an idea. Her face brightened, cautious optimism blooming. So you're okay with it? You'll go along? He nodded. His tone deceptively calm. Sure. I'll set it up, find a guy, someone good at what he does. I'll make sure he's clean, safe. He'll come here, give you what you want, no strings, no mess. Her jaw dropped, shock widening her eyes. Are you insane? She sputtered, recoiling. Why not? He countered, leaning forward, his grin widening. If it's just sex, who it is shouldn't matter. Right? A stranger's perfect, no emotional baggage, no risk of feelings. You get your fun, and I don't have to sit here imagining you falling for some bastard. She shook her head, flustered. That's not what I meant. I'm not some sex-crazed lunatic who'd sleep with just anyone. I need something with the person, some spark, some connection. I'm not a machine. Exactly, he said. His voice softening, triumphant. It's not just sex, then. You want more, a bond, a chemistry. That's what this is really about. Her cheeks burned, and she stumbled over her words. Okay. Maybe there's some truth there, she conceded, reluctance heavy in her tone. He chuckled, the sound low and bittersweet. What? She demanded, frowning. You're tripping over yourself, he said. Amusement warring with the hurt still simmering inside. If it's meaningless, why bother? If it's nothing, there's no point. But if it does mean something, why chase it when it's not what you want? She buried her face in her hands, a groan of frustration escaping her. It doesn't mean anything to me, she mumbled, then sighed. But it means something to me. Her contradiction hung there. Fragile and raw. He reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. Sex isn't just physical, Maggie. It's the deepest thing we share. When we got married, we promised that intimacy, all of it, would be ours alone. Now you're asking to give that away. His disappointment seeped through, heavy and quiet. As he looked at the woman he'd vowed to love forever, wondering how they'd ended up here. The air in our kitchen felt thick, suffocating, as I stood there. My hands gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles whitened. The words Maggie had just spoken lingered like a bitter aftertaste, each syllable twisting the knife deeper into my chest. She wanted to toss aside the vows we'd made, the promises etched into the foundation of our marriage, to chase something new, something more with someone else. My mind reeled. A storm of hurt and disbelief churning inside me. Was I not enough anymore? Did the intimacy we'd built over years, the quiet moments of connection, the nights tangled in each other's arms, mean so little to her now? So, you're looking for an upgrade, I said, my voice low but sharp, cutting through the tension. You're bored with me, with us, with what we have in bed. It's not enough to keep you satisfied, is it? Maggie flinched, her shoulders hunching as if my words were a physical blow. No, George, that's not what I meant, she shot back. Her tone laced with a defensive edge, but her eyes darted away, refusing to meet mine. I pressed harder, stepping closer, my gaze boring into her as if I could peel back the layers of her thoughts. Then what? You want to sleep with him just to prove he's not as good as me? Is that the game? She didn't answer, her silence a heavy weight between us. Her lips parted, then closed. Her face a mask of uncertainty. Of course not, I went on, my voice steady now, resolute. You wouldn't even be thinking about this unless you already believed it'd be better than me. Better than us. You've already got it all mapped out in your head, don't you? How electric it could be with him. Maggie's cheeks flushed a deep crimson, her hands twisting together in her lap. I never thought about it like that, she stammered, her voice trembling, her composure cracking under the intensity of my stare. I could see it in her eyes, she was flustered. Thrown off balance by the raw edge of my accusations, but I wasn't done. You've completely blindsided me with this, I said, my tone sharpening. What happens when you come back home after? When you've had him, and it's better than anything we've ever shared? Have you even stopped to think about what that does to us? Her head dipped. Her voice barely a whisper as it trailed into the quiet. I never thought about it. But I wasn't letting her off that easily. You say this is about spicing things up for us, I pressed. Leaning forward, my emotions surging like a tide I couldn't hold back. But if he's better, if he lights you up in ways I can't, you'll never look at me the same. You'll ache for him, dream of him. And where does that leave me? Feeling like I'm not man enough for my own wife. How do we go on like that? Maggie's expression softened, a flicker of guilt shadowing her features as she reached out. Her fingers brushing the air between us hesitantly. We'll keep going like we always have, she said, but her voice wavered, tinged with a fragile uncertainty that only fueled my frustration. How? I demanded, my voice rising, raw with the ache clawing at my insides. How do I touch you, kiss you, make love to you, knowing you'd rather have someone else's hands on you? How do I live with that? Her hand faltered, dropping back to her side as she murmured, I never meant to make you feel this way, George. Her voice was soft, thick with remorse. But it did little to soothe the storm raging in me. I just thought, maybe it could bring back the fire we've lost. I stared at her, my chest tight with a sorrow so heavy it threatened to crush me. At what cost, Maggie? If what we have isn't enough for you, what's left of us? She looked back at me, her hazel eyes glistening with unshed tears. A swirl of sadness and doubt swirling in their depths. How do I even try to be close to you again, I continued, frustration bleeding into every word, knowing your mind's drifting to him. If he's better in bed, how could you ever settle for me? You'd always want him, crave him, and I didn't sign up to be your second choice. She shook her head, a desperate edge to her movements. It won't be like that, George, I swear, she insisted, her voice pleading now, but I wasn't convinced. Then why? I shot back, stepping closer, my hands curling into fists at my sides. You want this because you think it'll be earth-shattering, something we've never touched. If you didn't believe that, you wouldn't even consider it. And the worst part? I can't win here. My anger flared, hot and unrelenting, as I poured out the hurt I'd kept locked inside. I love you, Maggie. I think you're the most beautiful woman I've ever known. I've only ever wanted you. I thought what we had was incredible, our nights together, the way we fit. But you pulled away. You shut me out. And now you've got this fantasy of him, new, thrilling, forbidden. Even if I gave you everything he could, you'd still think he's better. He's already won. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she sat there, speechless, her hands trembling in her lap. Who put this garbage in your head? I demanded, my voice booming through the room, frustration boiling over. Who's feeding you these insane ideas? George, please, she pleaded, her voice shaking. Fragile as glass. Maggie, this is bullshit, I snapped, my patience fraying to threads. I'll never agree to you running off with some guy. I won't sit here twiddling my thumbs while you're out screwing someone else. And if you ever thought I'd let another man touch you, then you're not the woman I married. Her eyes widened. Shock rippling across her face, but I stood firm, unyielding. Get out, I said, my voice cold and steady, pointing toward the door. I don't want you here. You're right, we won't last. 20 years? We won't even make it to tomorrow. We're done. The fact that you'd suggest something this stupid tells me you've already checked out, your heart, your mind, maybe even your body. You're moving on. So go. She straightened, defiance flashing in her stance. I'm not going anywhere. This is ridiculous. I live here. I'm your wife. You can't just kick me out. Fine, I growled. Snatching my keys and wallet from the counter, my boots thudding against the hardwood as I stormed toward the garage. Where are you going? She called after me. Her voice breaking as tears streamed down her cheeks. George, please don't go. Let's talk. We can fix this. I stopped, turning to face her, my eyes locking with hers. You've got one shot to stop me, I said, my tone hard as steel. Swear to me right now, swear you'll never bring this up again. That you'll never date another man, never climb into anyone else's bed. That you'll stay true to me, faithful, devoted, like we promised at the altar. Not just that you won't say it, you won't even think it. She stared at me. Her face a battlefield of anger and desperation, her breath hitching. George, please, I think this could help us, she whispered, her voice cracking. No, I said flatly. Reaching for the garage door. Her cry cut through the air, sharp and frantic. Wait. Please, I promise, I swear I won't talk about it again. Just don't leave. I turned back. The weight of the moment pressing down on me as I met her tear-streaked gaze. There's something else, I said, my voice low, laced with a seriousness that made the air feel heavier. I don't know who planted these ideas in your head, but I'll find out. And if I learn you've already gone out with him, if you've slept with him, I'll file for divorce. That's not a threat, Maggie. It's a fact. She shook her head furiously. We're not dating, George. We haven't done anything. But the thought's there, I countered, my words sharp as a blade. And if you want any chance of saving what's left of us, you'd better not lie to me. No more secrets, no more games, no more betrayal. Got it? I swear, George, she sobbed. Her hands twisting together. We were just talking about it. Talking about sleeping with another man, I spat, my frustration spilling over. This whole conversation, this ambush, it proves everything. You didn't just want some meaningless fling. You wanted my blessing to fuck a specific guy. You've already planned it all out. You disgust me. Her tears fell harder, her shoulders shaking as she crumpled under the weight of my words. I'm sorry, George. I didn't think you'd take it like this, she choked out between sobs. Who is he? I demanded, my anger surging again, a wildfire I couldn't contain. Who's been filling your head with this trash? She hesitated, her eyes dropping to the floor, then whispered, Stephen. My heart sank, a cold dread settling in my gut. Stephen Archer? That consultant you've been working with? The one you dragged me to meet at the Fouline's dinner party? The memory hit me like a punch, his easy smile, the way he'd lingered too long when he shook her hand, the casual charm that had grated on me even then. Now it all made sense. And the betrayal cut deeper than I'd ever imagined. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, as I sat across from Maggie, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "Stephen Archer," I said. The name tasting bitter on my tongue as I repeated it, trying to anchor myself in the swirling mess of emotions threatening to pull me under. "Tell me everything." My voice came out heavy, worn thin by exhaustion and disbelief. "Every single detail, what's happened, what you've talked about, every little thing you know about this guy." For the next 2 hours, I stayed silent. A statue carved from tension, as my wife unraveled the story of how Stephen Archer had slithered into her life. Her words painted a picture of a slow, deliberate dance, a creeping influence that had unfolded over months, subtle enough to avoid raising alarms, yet calculated to twist her thoughts. She swore there'd been no physical line crossed. No stolen kisses, no blatant moves. Stephen had played the long game, patient as a spider spinning its web, waiting for her to secure my blessing before striking. As her voice faded, two truths crystallized in my mind, sharp and unyielding: my marriage was teetering on the edge of a cliff, no matter if she ever spoke to him again. And Stephen Archer needed to face the consequences of his quiet, insidious game. Maggie's eyes searched mine, tentative and fragile. "Are you still angry with me?" she asked. Her voice barely above a whisper, as if she feared the answer might shatter her. I let out a long, ragged sigh, my chest tight with the weight of everything I couldn't quite name. "Maggie, I don't even know what I feel," I admitted, the words spilling out raw and unpolished. "It's a mess. Part of me is gutted, furious, even, that you'd let these ideas take root in your head about us. If you were unhappy, if you wanted to shake things up in the bedroom, there were 100 other paths we could have taken before you wandered into this." Her gaze dropped to the floor, her face crumpling with a sadness that tugged at something deep inside me, despite my anger. "I get it," she murmured, her voice small, laced with regret. "But then," I went on, my tone softening against my will, "there's this other part of me that feels for you, manipulated by some creep who saw your weak spots and pounced. Still, fixing this? Rebuilding trust? That's on you. And it's not going to be quick or easy." Her eyes flickered with a faint spark of hope. "I'd really like that," she said softly, clinging to the possibility. "Can we just move past it? Pretend it never happened?" I shook my head, the honesty cutting through me. "No, we can't. There's a piece of me that wants to walk out that door and never turn back. Forgiveness might come someday. But it's a hell of a climb to get there." Maggie nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, remorse etched into every line of her face. Then, hesitantly, she ventured, "Was there any part of you that, I don't know, found it intriguing? Amusing, even?" I stared at her, incredulous, the question igniting a fresh flare of frustration. "You're seriously asking me that after everything I just laid out?" I snapped, my voice rising despite my efforts to keep it steady. Her cheeks flushed a deep red, embarrassment flooding her features. "I'm sorry," she whispered, shrinking back. I had to know." I dragged a hand across my face, forcing a deep breath to steady myself. "So what now?" she asked, her voice barely audible, fragile as glass. "I don't know," I said, my mind a storm of clashing thoughts, anger, hurt, and a desperate need for clarity. "I need time to sort through this mess. But the fact that you're still entertaining this idea? That tells me a lot about where we're at." Her face fell, her eyes pleading as she reached for me with her words. "Please tell me you don't want a divorce," she begged, her voice cracking. "I don't know what I want," I confessed, the weight of it pressing down on me. It's up to you, Maggie. If I find out you've lied, or if you don't handle Steven the right way, I can't promise anything. Her expression tightened, worry threading through her tone. He's going to ask about it. What should I tell him? Be careful what you say, I warned, my voice firm. Do you talk outside of work? Calls, texts, anything? She shook her head, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. No. Not really. It's mostly just at work. Steven made a rule, no contact outside the office. Good, I said, relief flickering briefly through me. Keep it that way. When he asks, tell him to drop it, forget it ever happened and never bring it up again. Of course, she agreed, her tone resigned, heavy with the weight of her choices. Curiosity gnawed at me. A sinking feeling settling in my gut. Is he married? Maggie nodded, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Yes. They just had their second kid a few months ago. I froze. The revelation hitting me like a sucker punch. My God, Maggie, I said, disbelief coloring every word. And you were okay with this? What about his wife, his family, did you even think about them? Her cheeks burned brighter, shame flooding her face. He told me they have an open marriage, she confessed, her voice trembling. I wanted to believe him. I see now how stupid that was. I leaned forward, my gaze locking onto hers, fierce and unyielding. Maggie, if we're going to save this marriage, you need to be with me, all in, no doubts, no wavering. It's us against the world. Can you promise me that? Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, her voice breaking. I swear, you and our daughter are everything to me. Wait here, I said. Standing abruptly and retrieving my laptop from the study. The hardwood floor creaked under my steps as I returned, setting the device between us and flipping it open. Have you ever checked his Facebook? I asked, my fingers hovering over the keys. Yeah, a few times, she said, leaning in to type. He doesn't post much. Stephen Archer's profile loaded, a barren page, no hint of a wife, no family photos, just a blank slate. I switched to LinkedIn, where his professional life spilled out in meticulous detail, job titles, accolades, a polished facade. What's his wife's name? I asked. Janet, Maggie replied softly. I typed Janet Archer into the search bar, pulling up two profiles. Realtor or recruiter? Luxury real estate, she said, her voice steadying. Multi-million-dollar homes. I clicked the realtor link, and Janet Archer's face filled the screen, a stunning blonde with a radiant smile, exuding confidence. That's her? I asked. Studying the woman who didn't match Steven's description. I don't think so, Maggie said, frowning. I've never seen her, but he said she was older, overweight, unattractive. A dry laugh escaped me. Of course he did. I opened Janet's Facebook, scrolling through a gallery of family moments, her with a man named Steve, two little girls named Selena and Catherine beaming beside them. Sound familiar? I asked, pointing to the names. Maggie's eyes widened, recognition dawning like a slow sunrise. Those are Steven's daughters. We dug deeper. Finding snapshots from a cheerleading event, Janet, Selena, Catherine, and Steve, all grinning for the camera, a picture-perfect family. Maggie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Is that him? I pulled up more photos, Steve and Janet arm in arm, laughing on a beach, cutting a cake at a toddler's birthday party. Why would he risk all this to chase you? I asked, genuinely baffled. He's got a gorgeous wife at home. She faltered, tears brimming again. I don't know, she stammered. That's not what he told me about her. You said open marriage, right? I pressed. Skepticism lacing my tone. That's what he claimed, she said, her confidence crumbling. I scrolled to a set of bikini photos, Janet, tanned and striking, lounging by a pool. I let out a low whistle. Half joking. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I've been looking at this all wrong. Maggie's brow furrowed, curiosity cutting through her distress. What do you mean? Do you have his number? I asked. A wild idea taking shape. She tensed, her voice shaky. You're not going to call him, are you? Why not? I said, a grin tugging at my lips. Her jaw dropped. Wait, you said you're on my team. I am. I shot back. And you said you'd back me up, no matter what, right? Yes, she admitted, still reeling. Okay, then call him. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over her phone. Why? My grin widened, mischievous and sharp. Well, Steven wants to sleep with my wife, right? If I let him have you, isn't it only fair I get a shot at his? Her eyes widened in shock. You want to sleep with his wife? Look at her, I said, nodding to Janet's photo, all curves and confidence in that bikini. She's stunning. This should never happen, Maggie protested. Her voice rising in panic. I chuckled, leaning back in my chair. You wanted to spice up our sex life, didn't you? She crossed her arms, defensive and flustered. Yes. And you were ready to spice it up with Steven, I pointed out, my tone teasing but edged with truth. So wouldn't it be even better if we turned the tables? Her mouth opened, then closed. Words failing her as she grappled with the absurdity of it all. The room fell silent, the tension between us crackling with unspoken possibilities, and for the first time in hours. I felt a flicker of control amidst the chaos. In the cozy glow of our living room, the air buzzed with a strange mix of excitement and unease as Ed tossed out his wild idea. It'd spice things up if I had a fling with his wife too, don't you think? He said, his voice brimming with a reckless thrill that made my stomach twist. I'd always known Ed to be the type who thrived on pushing boundaries, his dark eyes glinting with mischief as he sprawled across the couch, one arm draped lazily over the backrest. You're the one who said they've got an open marriage, he added, smirking like he'd already won some unspoken game. I hesitated, my fingers fidgeting with the hem of my sweater. Words tangling in my throat. Yeah, but, I faltered, searching for a way to explain the knot of dread tightening in my chest. It's not like you'd be jumping into bed with just anyone off the street. Ed cut in, his grin widening, sharp and teasing, like a fox eyeing a henhouse. My eyes widened, a jolt of shock coursing through me. What? No. I blurted. My voice pitching higher than I meant it to. What makes her so special then? He pressed, leaning forward now, his tone relentless, probing at the edges of my composure. I felt my face flush. Heat creeping up my neck as I struggled to articulate the turmoil swirling inside. She's married to Steven, I said, the words tumbling out clumsily. She's got his permission to see other guys. You're married to me, and now you're asking to do the same. Doesn't that mean you want to be like her? Ed's logic twisted around me like a vine, tightening with every breath. My heart thudded unevenly, torn between hurt and confusion, my gaze locked on his. No, I whispered, shaking my head, it's not the same at all. But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me. Why couldn't I pin down the difference? Why not? Ed shot back, his voice smooth but insistent, like he was peeling back layers I wasn't ready to expose. How's it any different? How are you and Janet not the same as me and Steven? I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. She's too pretty, I admitted, my voice trembling, raw with a vulnerability I hated showing. Ed arched an eyebrow, his expression shifting to mock surprise. So it's fine if I pick someone less attractive, he asked, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. No. I snapped. Frustration bubbling over, my hands balling into fists. That's not what I meant. I felt cornered, my thoughts a jumbled mess as he watched me unravel. It's different, I mumbled. Defeated, sinking back into the armchair, the worn fabric rough against my skin. Ed leaned closer, his eyes narrowing slightly, searching my face. Are you scared I'll like it too much with someone else? He asked, his tone softer now but still pressing, like a blade testing a seam. Or that after I've been with her, I won't want you anymore? Or maybe that I'll be with you but thinking of her? My breath hitched, and the truth spilled out before I could stop it. Hell yes, I confessed, my voice breaking. A reluctant surrender to the fears I'd buried deep. Ed's face softened for a moment, a flicker of understanding passing through his eyes. Okay, I get it, he said. His hands raised in a peacemaking gesture, trying to douse the sparks flying between us. I see what you're doing here. But that was before I saw her, before I really thought about what you were suggesting. Now you think you can charm some gorgeous woman, and suddenly it's fine for me to sleep with Steven? My voice cracked with exasperation, the absurdity of it all hitting me like a slap. Hell yes. Ed replied, his enthusiasm undimmed. A boyish glee lighting up his face as if this were all a grand adventure. Why not? I stared at him, incredulous. You're an ass, I shot back, the words sharp and biting. Fueled by a surge of wounded pride. Wait, am I an ass because I want Janet? He countered, his tone shifting to playful defiance. You're the one who brought up trying someone else. I'm just going along with your idea. I felt my temper flare, heat rising to my cheeks. No, you're twisting this into something I never wanted. I said, my voice thick with emotion. A tremor of betrayal lacing every syllable. You wanted to mess around with other people but can't handle me doing the same. You're just trying to throw me off. Ed argued. His frustration mirroring mine, the air between us crackling with tension. I'm not confused, you are. I insisted, my chest tight with the effort to hold back tears. Maggie, calm down, Ed said. His voice gentling as he reached out, trying to bridge the growing chasm. Let's talk this out like grown-ups. I'm starting to see how this could work for us. But I shook my head. Resolute despite the ache in my throat. I don't want this anymore, I said firmly, my decision crystallizing in the heat of the moment. You've talked me out of it. This whole thing, it's a mistake. Let's just drop it. Ed nodded slowly, a rare hint of regret shadowing his features. Take your time, he murmured, reaching for my phone on the coffee table. Its screen glowing faintly in the dim light. He scrolled through my contacts, his thumb hovering over Steven's name before tapping it. Let's call your guy and see what he thinks, he said. A sly edge creeping back into his voice. No. I lunged forward, panic seizing me as I grabbed for the phone. Hang up, Ed, don't call him. But he held it out of reach. His finger pressing the call button with deliberate calm. Shoo, it's okay, honey, he said, his voice low and soothing, though his eyes sparkled with mischief. The phone was already ringing. And he switched it to speaker, the dial tone echoing through the room like a countdown to chaos. My heart pounded as Steven's voice crackled through, clipped and irritated. Maggie. I told you not to call me at home. Ed straightened, his demeanor shifting to something sterner, more commanding. Hello, is this Stephen Archer? He asked, enunciating each word with slow precision. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end, followed by a faint click as the line went dead. Weird, Ed remarked, glancing at me with feigned innocence. We got disconnected. Guess I'd better try again. I reached for the phone again, desperation clawing at me. Please, don't do this, I begged, my voice trembling as I clutched his arm. But Ed ignored me, redialing with a casual air that belied the storm he was stirring. "Hello, Stephen. This is Maggie's husband. You there?" A reluctant, "Yes, I'm here," came through, tinged with wariness. "What do you want?" Stephen asked, his annoyance palpable even through the static. "Is this a bad time?" Ed replied, his tone deceptively polite. "What do you want?" Stephen repeated, sharper now, clearly on edge. "Well," Ed began, settling back into the couch, "Maggie told me how you asked her out. And I think that's a fantastic idea." I grabbed his hand, trying to stop him. But he shushed me gently and pressed on. "I mean, with some ground rules, of course, agreements to keep everything above board." "Ground rules? Agreements?" Stephen's voice wavered, confusion seeping through his irritation. "Yeah," Ed said brightly. "If you're going to have a good time with my wife, I want it all out in the open, no secrets, right?" Stephen's response was hesitant, lacking conviction. Perhaps?" Ed's tone turned serious, almost noble. "The last thing I want is to wreck a marriage with lies. I love Maggie, don't want to lose her. So I'm fine with this. As long as we're all honest about it." Stephen muttered a weak, cool, "Yeah, makes sense," but I could barely hear him over the roar of my own heartbeat. I stared at Ed, my jaw slack with disbelief, shaking my head as he barreled forward. "Baby, I don't want this," I whispered, but he waved me off with a dismissive shrug. "Great," he said to Stephen. "Why don't you grab Janet, put her on speaker? Let's get her in on this." "What?" Stephen's voice spiked with alarm. "Why don't you call your wife, Janet, mother of your girls, Selena and Catherine, the one you're in an open marriage with? Let her hear all the juicy details," Ed said, his words dripping with provocation. "Listen," Stephen growled, his patience fraying, "I don't know what you're playing at," Ed cut him off, his voice steady and unrelenting. "Stephen, I'm not playing. Maggie told me you and Janet have an open marriage, that you don't care who sleeps with who. We checked out her bikini pics on Facebook, damn, she's stunning. I'll enjoy my time with her while you're with my wife." Stephen's reply was shrill, panicked. "What the hell are you doing?" "Simple," Ed said, leaning into the phone. "I'll entertain Janet, you entertain Maggie. That's how open marriages work, right? Wife swapping? You son of a, don't drag my wife into this." Stephen barked, his anger crackling through the line. "Stephen, my friend," Ed replied coolly, "it's too late for that. You've been chasing my wife for months. Wasn't Janet pregnant with Selena most of that time? Congrats on the new kid, by the way. Bet she's back in shape and ready for me." "Shut up," Stephen roared. "I told you, leave Janet out of this." Ed's voice dipped into mock curiosity. "Wait, are you saying she doesn't know you're after Maggie? Aren't you in an open marriage?" I buried my face in my hands, tears stinging my eyes as a woman's voice, Janet's, floated faintly from the background. "Honey, what's wrong? Who's this?" Stephen stammered to her, "Nobody, everything's fine. Get the girls ready to go." Then, to Ed, "Yeah, big day, Catherine's got a cheerleading tournament this afternoon." "How the hell do you know that?" Stephen demanded, his shock palpable. Ed chuckled, low and dark. "You'd be amazed what you can dig up on Facebook. Here's a thought," he paused, letting the silence stretch, baiting Stephen's response. "What's your idea?" Stephen finally bit, his voice tight. "How about Maggie and I swing by the tournament? We'll fill Janet in on everything she's missed. Then we can hit a bar, get to know each other, come back here, and party all night. I'll even give you and Maggie the master bedroom." Stephen's growl was a low, feral rumble. "Stay away from my wife and kids. I'll kill you if I see you anywhere near them." Ed's tone stayed eerily calm. "Don't get so worked up, Stephen. You said no secrets, everyone should know what's happening, including Janet, right?" Stephen's yell was cut short as Ed interjected, "Fine, I'll just call Janet then." "Wait," Stephen pleaded, desperation seeping through. "Where'd you even get her number?" "Doesn't matter," Ed said, his voice hardening. "What matters is everyone knowing what you've been up to with my wife." Another long pause stretched out, heavy with unspoken threats. "Stay away from her," Stephen said at last, his bravado gone, replaced by a quiet plea. "If I hear you've been near her, I'll tell Janet everything." "Understood," Ed replied, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You work with Maggie, though, can't avoid her completely." "She's on vacation for 2 weeks," I chimed in weakly, my voice hoarse from crying. "When she's back, you'll need to switch companies. You're a consultant, tell your bosses one of the staff got too close, and for the business's sake, you need a transfer. They'll move you quick." Stephen's silence was his surrender, and as Ed hung up, the room fell quiet, the weight of our fractured trust settling like dust around us. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with the unspoken tension that had been simmering between us for hours. Stephen's voice crackled through the phone, laced with desperation and a hint of defiance as he stammered, "Out of there by the time she gets back. What if I don't do this?" His words hung there, a challenge thrown down like a gauntlet. I stood in our cramped living room, the faded floral curtains swaying slightly from the draft sneaking through the old window frames. My jaw tightened as I glanced at Maggie, my wife, her face pale and streaked with the remnants of tears she'd tried to wipe away. Her hands twisted nervously in the hem of her sweater. And I could see the storm of guilt and fear swirling in her hazel eyes. I turned back to the phone, my grip on it so tight my knuckles blanched. "Then I'll call Janet," I said, my voice low and deliberate, "and tell her everything." It was a bluff, pure and simple. I didn't even have Janet's number, not a single digit of it. But Stephen didn't know that. And I was banking on his paranoia to sell it. I shot Maggie a quick, sharp look, tilting my head ever so slightly to signal her to back me up. She caught it, blinking through the dampness clinging to her lashes. "Okay, honey," she said, her voice trembling but obedient, cracking under the weight of the moment like thin ice. She sniffed, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face, and I could tell she hated every second of this, hated being part of this twisted game we were playing. "Wait!" Stephen's shout burst through the line. Frantic now, the kind of panic that comes when a man realizes he's cornered. Okay, I'll tell them about it tomorrow morning. All right?" His tone was jagged, frayed at the edges. And I could almost picture him on the other end, pacing his pristine office, running a hand through his thinning hair, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool autumn evening. I let the silence stretch for a beat, savoring the way it gnawed at him, before I replied. "Good. You're not as stupid as Maddie claimed." My words were clipped, edged with a venom I didn't bother to hide. Then I added, slower, more pointed, "And one more thing, Maggie can hear you now. Apologize to my wife." The line went quiet. And I could feel his rage through the static, a simmering fury he couldn't quite unleash. I pictured him clenching his fists, his broad shoulders hunching as he wrestled with his pride. Finally, he exhaled, a deep, reluctant breath that sounded like it scraped his throat on the way out. "Sorry, Maggie," he muttered, the words short and grudging, spat out like they tasted bitter on his tongue. Maggie opened her mouth to respond, her lips parting with a shaky breath, but I cut in before she could. "Don't ever mess with my wife again," I warned, my voice dropping to a growl. Each syllable a brick in the wall I was building between him and us. Now, I suggest you get your act together and take your family to that cheerleading tournament. Good luck, Catherine. I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call with a jab of my thumb, the screen going dark as I tossed the phone onto the counter. It clattered against the chipped laminate. The sound sharp in the stillness that followed. I turned to Maggie, and her eyes met mine, wide, glistening, like a puppy caught in the rain, pleading for forgiveness she wasn't sure she deserved. Her shoulders slumped, and she took a tentative step toward me, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am so sorry," she started. Her words trembling with the weight of everything she hadn't said yet, every secret, every fear that had led us here. I raised a hand, palm out, stopping her mid-sentence. The gesture wasn't harsh. But it was firm, a silent command born of exhaustion and resolve. "Tomorrow," I said, my tone softening just enough to let her know I wasn't angry, not at her. "Not really, you'll need to call your boss. Tell him you've got an urgent family matter and need 2 weeks off." She dropped her gaze to the floor, her hands falling limp at her sides. The dim light from the kitchen caught the sheen of unshed tears in her eyes, and she nodded slowly, a small, defeated motion that made my chest ache. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her close and tell her it would be okay, but something held me back, maybe the lingering sting of betrayal, maybe the uncertainty of what came next. The room seemed to close in around us. The hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog the only sounds breaking the silence. Maggie stood there, fragile and lost. And I wondered how we'd gotten to this point, how a single phone call had unraveled so much, yet somehow stitched us tighter together. Stephen, on his end, likely stormed out of his office after that call, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor of his too-perfect suburban home. I could imagine him barking orders at his wife, Catherine. A petite woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, who'd probably been hovering nearby, sensing something was off. She'd spent weeks preparing for that cheerleading tournament, ironing their daughter's uniform, packing snacks, coordinating with the other moms, and now Stephen's mess threatened to derail it all. He'd probably muttered some half-baked excuse about work stress, avoiding her probing questions as he grabbed his keys and shuffled their kids into the car. Catherine deserved better than him, I thought, and not for the first time. She was tough, fiercely protective of her family, and I wished her luck, not just for the tournament, but for dealing with the fallout of whatever Stephen confessed tomorrow. Back in our house, the night stretched on. Maggie retreated to the bedroom, her footsteps soft against the worn carpet. While I lingered in the living room, staring at the phone on the counter like it might spring back to life. The weight of what I'd done, of bluffing my way through that call, of dragging Maggie into it, settled over me like a fog. I'd won this round, sure, but at what cost? Tomorrow, Stephen would spill his guts to whoever they were, and Maggie would make her call. Her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. 2 weeks off, time to breathe, to figure out how to move forward. I sank into the couch, the springs creaking under me, and closed my eyes. The fight wasn't over, not really, but for tonight, we'd survived. And that had to be enough.